So this is good because now the recording can begin with a formal introduction to one of the most creative people that I know but have never met, Jasmeen Patheja, who is the founder-director of Blank Noise. We have a new tradition, Jasmeen, so bear with any embarrassment you feel of reading out full bios, simply because otherwise women tend to efface themselves from every story. Jasmeen Patheja is an artist in public service, committed to ending violence against women, girls, and all persons. She builds ideas for public and collective action. I mean, that is such a wonderful description of what you do. Patheja is the founder, facilitator of Blank Noise, a growing community of Action Sheroes, Deros, heroes, citizens and persons taking agency to end sexual and gender-based violence. Patheja initiated Blank Noise as a student project in 2003 in response to the silence surrounding street harassment in India and globally. Over the 18 years, she worked with communities and designed a wide range of interventions across forms of media to shift public consciousness and build ownership of the issue. Patheja facilitates to build testimonials of sexual violence, confront fear narratives, victim blame, initiate healing, listening, and empathy. Patheja's approach has grown from addressing street harassment to victim blaming, that which connects spaces of violence ranging from public to private. Patheja's artistic practice rests on the power of collaborations and building feminist solidarities. Facilitating collective imagination and desire are at the core of her practice. She mobilizes towards the right to be defenseless through the I Never Ask for Admission and Need to Sleep. In 2019, Patheja received the prestigious Visible Award, awarded for socially engaged art practice. She was also awarded the Jane Lombard Fellowship by the Vera List Center for Art and Politics at the New School, New York. BBC listed her as one of the 12 artists changing the world in 2019. In 2015, she received the International Award for Public Art towards the project Talk to Me, Blank Noise. Patheja is a TED speaker. She is also a TED and Ashoka Fellow. Her practice has received numerous media mentions, including The Atlantic, New York Times, The Guardian. Patheja has exhibited her work in institutions including Ford Foundation Gallery, New York, Bronx Museum of the Arts, Center for Contemporary Photography, Australia. She serves on the advisory board of FemTechNet. She served as a feminist mentor in South Asia Young Women Leadership and Mentoring Program of CREA, where she has worked with young women leaders across women's rights organizations in India. She's artist in residence at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology. Patheja also collaborates with her grandmother, Indrajit Kaur or Indri, on a series of photo performances, which are delightful. And she lives in Bangalore. So over to you, Jasmeen. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Swarna. I'm really, really happy to be here and to be with you and with Prajnya. And thank you to everyone who's here as well. And thank you for a very, very generous and warm welcome. So just put this aside. And I think, I just want to start by saying that everything I know is based on listening to the, based on listening to the lived experiences of the community and the individuals that I work with. So my understanding is based on that. And over the years, there have been questions around who is the community and therefore what is being listened to and how do we build our capacity and build methodologies or tariqas as to find solutions or tarkeebs to listen to everybody and in addressing gender, sexual and gender-based violence. I'm just going to play a video before I kind of dive in to just kind of move towards the idea of defenselessness, but I will be going through defense and then arriving at defenselessness and the role of blame within that.
Would you
So Blank Noise started in 2003 when I was a student at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology. I was about to graduate and I had spent a year as part of a lab called Communication for Social Change, led by the founder director of Srishti, Geeta Narayanan. The premise of that lab was really to bring students to think about and imagine ways in which artists and designers contribute to social change. That very often we're brought in at the end of the process to create a communication product, but what does it mean to be at the start of the journey, to be part of building the vision, to work with stakeholders, and also recognize that communicating for social change didn't rest on didactic messaging. It was in asking new questions. It was in finding the crevice. It was in looking really between the layers, and that understanding its complexity. That's an area that art and design students, artists and designers can play a role in and contribute with. I proposed, wanting to have a conversation on something I didn't know how to name. I remember muttering and saying, "Is it Eve teasing?" And all, until then, I grew up in Calcutta and I moved to Bangalore. Not to say I didn't experience street harassment in Calcutta, but there was this sense of home to run back to, where home was safe. But growing up spending my early adulthood in Bangalore, and now I'm in my early 40s. There were experiences and a lack of community to bring this to, a lack of conversation around it. So that's really where, Blank Noise as an idea was proposed. It started on campus, and this is a mind map before you, where about 60 all women students responded to the word public space. And as the mind map itself reveals, there were mostly negative associations with it. Which really gave the basis to say, okay, if all of us have experienced words like claustrophobic, defense, groping, feeling sick in words, confrontation, don't want to be seen, why aren't we talking about it? This group of 60 resulted in, 9 individuals, our first Action Sheroes, who stepped in to build a conversation. At the beginning, the idea really was to, how do we start a conversation? It was responding to the question, if we've experienced it, why aren't we talking about it? I did not, and then, back then I didn't understand silence, but it was responding to silence, questioning denial, questioning the fact that people just said it's trivial, it's just teasing after all. This group of 9 was critical. The next 3 months of being together as a group, we realized that we weren't alone in our experiences. All of us had experienced something we hadn't spoken about. We spoke about our changing bodies at the age of 12, which wasn't experienced with pride, it was experienced with shame. We questioned our own silence, and this culminated into a lot of solidarity amongst us, and it also culminated into this in-house exhibition on campus as a graduation show, which comprised these audio testimonials, where I think that is important, because each of these testimonials was speaking to someone, keeping in mind that it could be the listener could be someone who's a survivor. The listener could be someone who's a witness or a bystander who could be witness, or the listener is also someone who could have intentionally or even unintentionally been a perpetrator of street harassment. And after I graduated, there were these large looming questions of now what, which medium, where is the community, how does this become everybody's, and how, and how do we move to a place of taking collective ownership of the issue. I happened to start blogging. It is also that's when I met Khatija as well, and some years later you, Swarna. So I started blogging, and I would post these photographs. At that time, my idea of addressing fear was dealing, putting a camera to a harasser's face and writing about it. And we broke away from that approach, only to recognize that it was systemic. But what it did, what that practice did, or that methodology did, which I look back at Blank Noise as a community of Action Sheroes, Heroes, Theros, and as an artist in public services, as an artist committed to socially engaged art practice, I'm working to find methodologies and build methodologies and propose methodologies through community listening. So what publishing these photographs did back then was really to trigger a discourse where was it flirting, or was it not flirting, it's harassment, or what was the spectrum of behavior that that was called street harassment or not being called street harassment. We were learning to define and name and make it visible. And it, of course, brought in questions of who the person with the camera was, who the harasser was seen as. And I see all of what we do as iterative. It is informed by critique, and we're learning through listening always. As I said, one of the things we had to do, what we wanted to do, was really to, I think, the posts on what is, the posts with men, the posts, sorry, I'm just rambling a little bit, the posts that featured, the blog posts featuring men who had harassed me, also, and the public conversation that followed also led to us, saying, okay, what is street harassment and how do we name it? So this chart, this opinion poll is called an Eve teasing in quotes opinion poll, which was built with a group of people who are beginning to come together through blogger.com in response to these posts. So people like Sunaina Roy, Saptarshi, Insia, Shuktara, all in Calcutta, we formed these groups, and we were listing these words, and then we were building these kind of toolkits, inviting people to put a thumbprint on what they considered, again in quote, Eve teasing, to call it street harassment. So over the first decade of Blank Noise, I would say our practice was really rooted in bringing attention to street harassment and finding ways to do so, and naming it, giving a vocabulary. And at that time, back in 2003, 2004, I was very struck by the fact that when I would ask people to speak to me about their experiences of street harassment, I would get all kinds of responses from, it doesn't happen to me. Some even said, I'm not that kind of woman. How can you ask me that kind of question? Which was very perplexing back then, but it took years to also, as we worked on the I never asked for admission and the role of shame, it fell in place. And that's what we work with, because at the core of it, when we're working to question and address attitudes that justify street harassment, izzat and blame, and the internalized idea of the good woman, the good girl that we're raised to be is located. So it was in asking questions when we heard that I don't experience it, or that I don't recognize it because I've not had a name for it, is where these questions, emerged of, is there something you're not leaving home without? So things like safety pin, nail filer, red chili powder, somebody even said Baygon spray. So through these testimonies of everyday objects, we created this online project called the Museum of Street Weapons of Defense, which was really not to offer this as a methodology to carry with you, but a methodology to talk about fear, to confront fear, to examine fear, and to make it visible to us. Because fear for too long had been normalized. Even for me, it was only in recognizing that my elbows are out and I'm suddenly dressing differently and I have a don't come near me death stare all the time, that it was in noticing that and also recognizing that as a student photographer, walking the streets of Bangalore was part of my practice, but I noticed that most of my friends went out only in groups. So I think all of these questions were crucial to, and observations were part of, part of starting Blank Noise. As I said, we were building different methodologies. We were, I think, again, for the first decade, we were, responding to myths and trying to break myths. For example, this night action plan, again, as a methodology was created. And again, these methodologies at this stage, I'd say, are open. We're working to make them open and accessible so that it can be used. And as you said, Swarna, that, you refer to the opinion poll. And so that's really the direction we want to move towards in terms of, so that it is accessible. So yes, this is the night action plan, which was done in Delhi in 2006 and later in Bangalore, in Kannada and in Hindi, where we were responding to this idea of, oh, violence doesn't happen here. It happens to those women in those places at that time of the day. And so this night action plan really was, had these 8 different stencils, which said, this Priya, who's age 17, there's Hasina, who's age 24, Pinky, who's age 9, Radha, who's age 63. And all of them are marking a time at which they experienced a form of street harassment. And we went around public spaces, literally mapping or literally stenciling to mark that this, to mark it there and to say that it doesn't really happen in unknown places. It happens in your presence every day. And we also wanted the city, we did this late at night. We organized, I remember students from Delhi University North Campus, and stepping out late at night was also part of this this call to action. We were mobilizing, getting together, and making these things happen. Along the way, we had several people also stop us saying, "What are you doing? It's not safe." And so there were multiple conversations that also unfolded. But we wanted the city, the idea for the night action plan was to also have the city literally wake up to the fact that this happens in your presence every day. So Blank Noise, I would say the practice is really into halves, or it has to practices 2 approaches, where one part focuses on building testimonials of violence and finding ways to build these testimonials of violence. The second part of Blank Noise is really located in listening to these testimonials and building ideas for collective action on the desired futures, on the futures that we deserve. And the we, again, is something I will build on. Who the we comprises is something I will build on as we move ahead. I also want to come back to one thing, but while blogging and a community being formed, a moment that was critical to the idea of the Blank Noise community was in 2006, when one of our fellow Action Sheroes, Smita Jain, she proposed the idea of a blogathon. She said she defined the blogathon as something that would invite various bloggers to share their experiences of street harassment. This idea proposed by Smita was taken forward, with a smaller group of fellow Action Sheroes and heroes and deros who wrote to various bloggers, and this event, on 8th of March 2006, where hundreds of bloggers spoke about street harassment, published a post about street harassment, and this led to people, this led to a kind of catharsis that we witnessed on blogs. It led to people naming street harassment. It led to people questioning why they hadn't spoken about it before. It led to people remembering an incident of street harassment from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that which wasn't named but not forgotten. And in that, and the media picking it up and the mainstream media picking it up, there was a lot of response from people across the country. Groups and clusters of communities were formed, and they were self-organized, and people wanted to have this conversation where they lived. As a result, what we did at Blank Noise looked like, there were multiple chapters. There was Blank Noise Chennai, Blank Noise Hyderabad, Kolkata, Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, and in Chandigarh as well. And a lot of this was, unfolding, and the conversations were growing. And then this community that wanted to do something about this, have these conversations about street harassment in their cities, was also participating in these calls to action, these public calls to action, where we were learning to stand idle. And in this process, people were becoming Action Sheroes. So this participation speaking, listening are all aspects of what it means to become an action shero, hero, dero. So there are various ways in which people and citizens and communities engage, participate, and take a position to end gender-based violence, at a position that they feel they have the capacity for at this moment. I would also say that, when we had these chapters back in 2006, it was a certain way of organizing. Today, our organizing looks different and it's constantly evolving and iterating. Back then, we were in our early 20s, now we're in our early 40s. So the capacities that volunteers bring in and the now 20-year-olds bring in are varying, and we're adapting, and also in relation to what the current stage of blank noise is and what the needs are in terms of organizing. So that's another chapter, and I'll put it for another conversation later. But in being idle, we were, was really, I think, the beginnings of learning to be defenseless, wanting to be defenseless. It was coming from a place of desire. What if we stood idle in public spaces? What if we learned how to make eye contact? What would that do to our bodies and ourselves? And what would that do to a public space? Again, while this action was happening in Bangalore, through these chapters that were located and connected through the web, through Blogger, through mailing lists, these actions were happening simultaneously across the country. And I think at the end, at the core of it, everyone was invited to reflect on what it meant for them to be here, to do this, what shifts they felt within, or what questions got raised, and also what happened to the site. I remember in Bangalore, there would be a row, and even in Delhi, where I physically was also, and I can speak from that lens, is that there were rows of men waiting for something to happen. There were questions like, are you waiting for someone? What are you doing here? And we were learning to not say anything at all and not justify our presence. And simultaneously, we would now, even with meet to sleep, we say we're just sleeping, we're just standing, and that's it. So we enjoyed the new visual we created together and through our bodies. And at Blank Noise, this idea also grew into asking ourselves, what kind of memory do actions like these create for the body? When we've been told to look down and come home as fast as you can, what happens in these moments, even with whether it's in being idle or in meet to sleep, where we're learning to be defenseless by being defenseless in sleep? What is the experience doing to our body, and what is the new memory we should intentionally build, because that's what we deserve? So these actions were happening and across places, and there were various other actions like walking alone or the Action Shero game. But I'll stay with now the Ha 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 Sangha, which is from 2012, which is a project that was built in the classroom, and the classroom was a park. It was built in with students at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, and as part of a 1-month lab with Blank Noise. And we would meet at this park every day and laugh and gradually invite. And of course, it looked like the laughter clubs that we're all familiar with, but our intentions here were different. And we went door to door, inviting, women in, or finding somebody dropping their child to school and just bringing them in. And or most of them in negotiated permissions with their husbands at home showed up, because it was mostly an all women space. And it was interesting to explore that idea also. What happens if it's an all women space? Who gets included and who gets excluded? And we were learning to tune into these questions back then. So what resulted with the Ha 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 Sangha was really an intergenerational group of women learning to laugh out loud, form these friendships. It was also in response to, as we know, there are campuses and localities and the relationships that often bears of the insider, the outsider. So it was also a tactic, a methodology to address that, to see, can we move or can we confront feelings of fear and the feeling of the outsider? Can we address that, and can we create belonging? And how do we do that? Through community and friendships. But laughter itself as a way of releasing the voice, as a way of being as a kind of freedom within itself, where we're not always where we can't be in control. I mean, it's the first time I'm thinking of laughter in that sense, but it is something that it's a release. It's also been part of workshops, where this is with the Tibetan Women's Association, I think in 2014, and we gathered in a city in Dharamshala square and had this kind of appearance, or this sudden action. I don't know if I should call it a flash mob, but we just laughed. And So yeah, so whether it was in a neighborhood or in the middle of a city square, it was also part of 1 Billion Rising Kolkata in 2012, where a group that I, with Red Light Foundation, we just laughed in the middle of a public space. And what does that do to be able to, what does it do again for the body when we do that? Similarly, with Talk to Me, I think whether I talk about the men I photographed and the questions around, I think the journey with those questions around which kind of man have you been taught to fear, and what is the bias within that fear? Is there a bias? I think all of those questions have been brewing and informing Blank Noise and the methodologies we create over the years through these questions. So with Talk to Me was also with students at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, again as a pilot, where we were mapping the area of Yelahanka and documenting sites where students and others in Yelahanka felt safe and unsafe. And this lane was identified as a lane that they had to walk really fast through and get home. And they used to, in fact, all of the students had named it the rapist lane. So we went there on a site visit and recognized that the street lights weren't working. There was a garbage dump. There was a garment the garment factory at the end. And every day at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, you'd see women really rushing to the bus. So we noticed that it was experienced as a threat. And again, we don't have any recorded instances of harassment, but that was the narrative, and that it was called the rapist lane. So we pledged to make it the safest lane, and we said, what are the methodologies? Again, that was a proposal. I do not make such claims now that it's not the safest lane today, but this is an action that happened then. This is also through the month where students in the classroom were processing fear, understanding silence, confronting silence. So they were also going through a series of questions that were self-confrontational, and I guess prepping for this moment. This idea was proposed, so would you sit in front of a stranger to talk about anything except violence for an hour? So the idea was met with curiosity, anxiety, and again, we worked through that. And letters were created, bilingual letters were created saying, "Dear stranger, talk to me. We haven't had a chance to speak before. We can talk about anything from our fears, our hopes, our dreams. And in that process, you will be an action hero too." So this letter was greeted with a surprise. Action Sheroes, heroes, zeros sat across each other. What the community in the classroom did reveal was that it was, that they did reveal was that it was a conversation. As much as it was a conversation with the stranger, it was a conversation with their fears. And I remember one Action Shero, Arushi, saying that sometimes strangers are not so strange. What we really wanted to do with Talk to Me was to explore the idea of the bias in fear, the possible prejudice in fear. Who do we fear? Is it located in gender? And what are the intersectionalities that inform our fear? And how do we confront that within? We also wanted to explore the idea of connection and what connection could do. When you're in an unscripted conversation, what do you arrive at with this person? Can it lead to a connection? Can connection lead to empathy? Can it lead to dissolving fear? So we were exploring that as an idea. I will now come back to testimonies, and I will now come back to testimonies. I just want to take a moment to go back to when I was talking about people talking to me and not talking to me and saying, I'm not that kind of woman. The ones who did talk to me did say, I want to talk to you. And this happened to me. And I was wearing my school uniform and it still happened to me. And I was wearing that traditional salwar kameez, and I can't believe it still happened to me. So there was a noticing in this process, a noticing that garments were being repeatedly mentioned. And that led to recognizing a kind of pattern that the ones who speak, so many of us do remember these clothes. And why is that? So again, the first phase of I never asked for it, we were noticing and making this noticing visible to ourselves and also to communities, and the media and the press was picking it up. And again, as I said, the first phase was really about myth breaking and recognizing something that was indeed women across identities who experienced harassment. So I never asked for it was emerged in 2004 as an idea through this noticing. The campaign saw different names, from Did You Ask for It, I Never Asked for It, and now in the past decade and more, it's been I Never Ask for It as a present continuous tense. And but yeah, from the first phase, which was really about myth breaking and recognizing that it's all of us across identities, in the second phase, it was specifically in response to street harassment in the first phase. In the second phase, I would say from 2011, 2012, I think there was also a moment of recognizing and realizing that, how do we be action sheroes, not just on the street? How do we learn to walk in the middle of the pavement? How do we learn to not just walk in the middle of the pavement in public spaces, but how do we walk with charge across spaces in our lives? How do we, what does it mean? How's an action shero in a marriage? How's an action shero in an intimate partner relationship? How's an action shero on campus? How do we stay in our power? How's an action shero online on Twitter? So that idea, that idea was dominant. How do we stay in our power everywhere? How do we be action sheroes everywhere? The second was really how are spaces of violence interconnected? What is the relationship between what happens on the street and what happens at home? Who's the man on the street and who's the man at home? Simultaneously, there was also questions around who has blank noise been built by? Who's the community? Whose voice is yet to be heard? And therefore our understanding of the issue also. So it felt like the conversation was hugely incomplete. There was a lot to be done, and there was a revision of moving away, not moving away, but also working towards understanding how, the interconnectedness across identities, across places, and the role that victim blame played in this. So we returned to I Never Asked for It, but with this purpose. Where today the garment testimonials come from different experiences of violence. And again, we focus on memory. Why is it that we remember these clothes? Can memories hold a safe space? And that is where the garment archives, the I Never Asked for It archive comes in. So yes, I'll just play this video. I just want to do a quick time check. I mean, am I okay for another 15 minutes or 10 minutes? Or?
Yes. I don't think anyone is looking at the time.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay. So I'll play this video. It may be a little, it may be triggering. And it's a minute long. And I hope it plays.
3 layers actually. A pink spaghetti, translucent pink shirt on top of it, pair of capris.
It was black kurta and red leggings.
My white uniform, white skirt, white t-shirt.
My uncle was home and he was being inappropriate with me and he was being touchy with me. And of course, I went to my mom. What else would a child do? Her instant reaction was, she yelled at me. Your stance, your behavior, all of that represents a person who wants attention from men.
I really don't know how to talk to my parents because I thought I would be blamed for it. I used to wear burqa at that time. Though I was really very small, I started wearing leggings so that he doesn't see my legs.
So blank noise, and with the I Never Asked for It back then campaign and now mission, is, the call to action remains as bring your garment in, and bring that memory in, and the questions around how do we create a safe place for our memories, the place that a memory also. Yeah, so that's where I never ask for it has grown from being an idea or a noticing back then and asking people to, bring that garment, discard that garment, donate that garment. Now it's about speaking and listening and memory. So to speak if it serves you, do not speak at all if you don't wish to speak only on your own terms. So that's really at the heart of building I Never Ask for It. And we also feel it's a disservice. I feel it's a disservice because in terms of asking survivors of violence, including all of us, to speak, but when there's no capacity to listen. So at Blank Noise, again, our facilitated conversations and hopefully beyond smaller, intimate conversations, hopefully larger conversations are also should and want to be. I mean that right now it's more internal, but it's really on questions around listening. What happens when we listen? I think is there some audio thing happening? Yeah.
Yes, you're slightly muffled.
Okay. I think there's one. I think
You
there's
want to move to the next slide? Maybe it's some remnant of sound from your video.
I think there's one participant with the mic on. That's why it's happening. Can you see this? I think it's Prajnya host. Yeah, now it's gone. That's resolved. Yeah. Okay. So yes, so I never ask for it. We are working towards, and again, we propose this audaciously to say we're working towards building 10,000 garment testimonials. The idea behind, making that kind of declaration, setting that kind of intention really is so that it very intentionally and deliberately and purposefully is built by everyone. And that's really where the new labor at Blank Noise resides, in learning to have the capacity to hold these relationships, have these relationships of solidarities, and to make I Never Ask for It happen together. Behind making I Never Ask for, so what is, and so even in the research that we've been building, as a non-Dalit woman, what is, as one of our research associates from a year and a half ago, she looked at a project like Reporting to Remember, which documents violence against women in public memory. So she looked at, we were working on, finding the thread of victim blame as experienced by Dalit women, where maybe the length of the skirt is not the conversation, but the fact that violence has been made invisible, has been erased, the fact that a murder is called a suicide, the fact that kidnapping is termed elopement, are all forms of victim blame. So, how does victim blame locate itself and justify violence against so many communities, locally and globally? So yes, as an artist, I'm interested in, something that's like a shared truth, is deeply local and also universal. And that's the approach that we bring in understanding I Never Ask for It, and in saying, I never ask for it. In the body, again, through something like Meat to Sleep, where we are sleeping and we're saying I have a right to be defenseless, and I never ask for it. So it's in the body when we can do that. So behind making I Never Ask for It happen and walking towards these 10,000 testimonials, again, 10,000 as a projection to foster, enable the work that needs to be done to make it happen, are again trying to understand and work on projects related to campus and understanding patriarchy on campus, which I won't go into now, but I'm just leaving it as a future conversation to connect on. And again, I will skip all of this, but this, or building murals which are built of testimonials, or having public actions where we are walking with the garments through this action called Walk Towards Healing. So again, it's a performative walk, again, something we wish to do in multiple cities and places. And yeah, so I will stop on I Never Ask for It for now, but just come back linking I Never Ask for It to Meat to Sleep. So like I said, we are building testimonials, we're listening to these testimonials, and we're bringing in and protecting our right to imagine and desire and create collective action, leap into collective action, which is really towards defenselessness, to be in that state of defenselessness as our birthright. Again, I go back to 2007 or 2008, when we did an event online on Blogger, asking bloggers and many others to send in a wish for their city, a wish list for their city, things that I wish I could do in my city. And we were very, very struck by how simple the responses were, that I wish to be able to get wet in the rain, but not worry about who's staring at me. I wish to wear that red lipstick. I wish to walk skipping. That year, and through that event, I decided to participate too. And I said, I wish to be able to sleep. The following year, a group of us got together and went to Bangalore's Cubbon Park. And each of us claimed our wishes. Action Sheroes Saraswati dared herself by, sitting on a park bench and stretching and pouting and snacking. I went equipped with this, the patta and a cushion. And there was also Action Sheroes Shresi, who was with me in this action. And I was trying to sleep. It was a moment of recognizing the amount of fear that I carried in me. It was everything in the opposite direction of all the training I'd received up until that date, from having to be alert to not be alert, and learning to claim that. I would wake up. Every time I would almost go into sleep mode, I would say, Saraswati is here, Soumya is here, Shresi is here, I can do this. And I would wake up and realize, oh, it was just a leaf that was rustling. It was just the dog walking by. And I just lay there thinking about the story of fear we carry, the fact that there are more of us in fear of each other than with the actual intention to harm each other. So how do we look at that truth and work with that truth in addressing gender-based violence? And so that's really where I said I could do this if thousands of people around me, thousands of women were also sleeping. And what would it do to do this together? What would it do to our bodies? What would it do to a place to witness women doing this? So that's really where Meet to Sleep as an idea was formed. And defenselessness, again, without using that vocabulary, emerged. So a couple of years later, Meet to Sleep is now built in association with many feminist allies. I believe it's almost 50 feminist allies and feminist networks across the country and sometimes beyond, with groups like Kriya and Sangat, so again, I'll take one step back. As an artist, I believe that I'm interested in the idea of, like I said, the local and the universal, and the local and the shared truth. So as an artist, I'm interested in questions around, who does this speak to and why, and how do you make it your own? So that's with I Never Ask for It. That's with Meet to Sleep. It's working with communities, working with groups and organizations to explore this question through the women, non-binary persons that they work with. So Meet to Sleep is built across multiple sites and locations, and in an attempt to move towards a place of defenselessness. This is in Jharkhand. This is with Sadbhavna and Lucknow Trust and Lucknow leaders in Lucknow. This is back to Bangalore, again Bangalore. It has also rested, it rests on the labor of feminist alliances and feminist solidarity. We had it took Action Shero Hamida to say, how do we not make this an event and a campaign, but how do we make this something that, there's a movement, and how do we not just show up for the event? So it just led to a dialogue. That led to a dialogue where all of us, all the Meet to Sleep allies gathered during the pandemic online. And we had conversations on what it meant for each of us to have this experience. What were we negotiating? What was the relationship with shame, or the fact that we were consciously adjusting our clothes? What did it mean to be able to sleep even on our balconies, and now suddenly sleep in the middle of Ghantaghar in Lucknow? And to recognize that all of us were doing this together across places. So that's really what Meet to Sleep and the call, speaks to. And the call to action really has been, Khule Aasman Tale Azadi Ki Or, which is under open skies towards freedom. Jahan Dar Bhag Gaya, which is where fear disappeared and dissolved. Hum so gaye. We fell asleep. I'll play, and Kamla Bhasin has championed Need to Sleep. And again, it relied on this. It relied on people like Kamla Bhasin herself, championing the call to action, spreading the call to action. So again, it rests on that kind of labor. I'll play this video.
On 16th of December, with deepest of sadness, we will remember Jyoti Singh and every girl, boy, and woman who has been sexually harassed in public spaces. We'll go out into public spaces, lie in the sun, read, or sleep to say goodbye to the fear inside. We will let the world know that India, its streets, its roads, its parks belong to us women also. We'll tell everyone that in 1947, freedom came not just for Bharat, but also for Bharatis. Will you do the same?
आदाब, मैं हूँ हमीदा सद्भावना ट्रस्ट से और इस बार हम अलग अलग पहचान की लड़कियां और महिलाएं नीड टू स्लीप को अपना बना रही हैं। यानी 15 दिसंबर को हम सारी लड़कियां इकट्ठा हो रहे हैं और एक ऐसे खुले मैदान में, पार्क में, जहां पर हम खुल के सांस ले सके, जहां पर हम बिना डरे अपने नींद को भर सके। तो इस तरह से हमें सुरक्षित माहौल बनाना है, खासकर हम औरतों के लिए। तो इस पूरे कैंपेन को हम आगे ले जाएंगे और इसी तरह से हम सारी लड़कियां मिलकर बिना शर्म के, बिना झिझक के, बिना डर के और उस खुले आसमान में नींद भरेंगे और साथ ही साथ धूप की गर्मी अपने जिस्म में उतारेंगे। तो हमें लगता है कि इस चीज की शुरुआत हमारे लिए बहुत ही अहम है, बहुत ही पुख्ता है और जिससे हम अपनी हाजिरी दर्ज करा पाएंगे। थैंक यू।
I won't take you through too many more videos, but it is people across the country, feminists, spreading the call to action, making it their own. This is with Akanksha Seva Sadan in, are you able to hear me? I'm suddenly getting notified saying it's unstable.
Oh, yes, we are, but you did freeze for a second.
Okay. This is Meet to Sleep in Mahoba with Gramo Nati Sanstha, Meet to Sleep with Anandi in Gujarat. And that led to, I'm told, that led to questions around citizenship, and it formed through this experience, it kind of inspired or kickstarted a new campaign for them called Jagya Apni, Jagya Hamari. I'll just play this video too. Oops. And so there are different ways in which the organizing is happening. Sometimes individuals say, I want to do this alone, and they go ahead and do it. This is Action Sheroes Pakhi, who did this in Bangalore's Hebbal area. She said that I was in a park from around 1:15 till 3:30 p.m. My heart was pounding as I entered. I picked a spot and eased myself into lying down. Since I was absolutely alone, I took a book and 2 bananas as my decoy. I put a leaf between the pages and held the book real close to my body and shut my eyes. Every rustle felt like someone had walked up to me. The wind felt like it was blowing away my sheet and my shirt, and my skin was showing, and the sounds around me were amplified. But my body just wouldn't let me fall into sleep. Again, a shared truth. So I did my best. I did the best I could. I shut my eyes for really long so that everyone who saw me thought I was asleep. When I woke up, a few men and women were looking at me off and on, but it didn't look like they cared anymore. They cared more. Two boys were sitting close by on the grass. Sorry, that's my eyes. But I didn't seem to be bothering them either. So I clicked a few pictures and came home. So again, I want to just think, I mean, as I was reading this, I was also thinking of why loiter. I was thinking of the many, many people, many groups over time that have made all of this happen. The conversations, the questions, the testimonials, the trust with which it has been built. I will also bring in maybe 2-3 more slides before we close. This is an action shero from Sakina from Gaurav Grameen Mahila Vikas. It's in Hindi, so I will translate.
नाम क्या है? मेरा नाम सकीना परवीन है। कहाँ रहती है? मैं जानीपुर मुड़ियाचक में रहती हूँ। और आप जब सोई थी यहाँ पे 2 घंटे, तो आपको क्या महसूस हुआ? मैं कभी एक गांव से इतनी दूर फील्ड में कभी नहीं सोई हूँ, पर आज मैं सोई हूँ। इससे मुझे लग रहा है जैसे आसमान में चिड़िया उड़ते हैं खुले आसमान में, वैसा ही मुझे भी महसूस हो रहा था। मैं अपने आप को आजादी महसूस कर रही थी। और मैं आज कभी कहीं भी गांव से दूर आकर कभी नहीं सोई हूँ, पर आज मैं ग्राउंड में 2 घंटे सोई, इसलिए मुझे आजादी।
Do I need to translate that, or is that? Yeah. Okay.
No, because you've got the translation on the slide.
Right. This is also a mother-daughter Action Shero team that have showed up to build Meet to Sleep for a few years. And this is from a few years ago, where Action Shero Vijay says, so at the end of Meet to Sleep, after every Meet to Sleep, we gather in a circle. We ask ourselves, did you sleep? Did you sleep on your back? Did you sleep sideways? What did it do for you to sleep? We talk about the shape and the state of our body in doing so. Also, Meet to Sleep is built with these guidelines on audio and text that people receive. That's so, yeah. But with this is what Vijay said. When my 11-year-old daughter was hearing adults share, she kept whispering back to me, what is the big deal about sleeping in a park? While she may be too young to understand this, my hope is that with movements such as these, she would continue to ask this question even as an adult woman living in India. Again, I'm just over the past couple of months, especially we've been people who've been at the Blank Noise office and volunteers have also been transcribing testimonials, have been transcribing Meet to Sleep experiences, some students from Srishti also, and we've been learning to listen to the vocabularies and the experiences and to make this, what is a shared story? Because, and we want to arrive at that from me sharing this to what is a collective shared story for Meet to Sleep. But these are just some of what we have listed out, which I'm going to run through. Yes, this is the part I wanted to come to. We were tuning into these words, listening to words, and noting down these words from transcriptions. Words like sukoon. Again, these are words from the community, but we were dar, sukoon. Sukoon meaning to feel calm and at peace. Dar meaning fear. So what is the collective experience of Meet to Sleep is what we're working on. Khabrahat means to feel nervous or anxious. Khauf, fear. Khwaish, which means desire. Chijak, hesitation. Anubhav, experience. Dupatta, scarf. Chadar, blanket. Sharir, the body. Befikr, without worry. Bebaki paida karna, to give birth to fearlessness. Tarika, a methodology or a way of doing something. Aram, rest. Shuruat, a beginning. Hum bhi, us too. Khulkar, with openness. Maza, fun. Ekata, solidarity. Dunya badal jayegi, the world will change. Apni ichha, my desire. Hissa, my share. Yeah, and so with this, and this is something, like I said, we're listening to these testimonials and listening to these responses to Meet to Sleep, and we're learning to listen more and make a note of, working towards what is the shared and collective experience, what is the shared and collective truth and how do we how do we build this together? And again, keeping in mind, again, questions around what makes a campaign, what makes a movement, what makes an event. And again, I want to bring in someone like Srilata Batliwala, who's also been very instrumental in making me think about these things. So big thank you to her. I think I'll close with also just a provocation around the body in its state of preparedness and the burden that the body carries, and the burden of having to be alert, and for us to imagine the state of the defenseless body as the birthright. Like what shape does that body acquire? How will we engage in a future, hopefully a near future, where we can be defenseless? What would those engagements look like, where they're rooted in trust? Yeah, so I'd like to close with that, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmeen. This was, I'm not the kind of person who is a fan of people. Devana may be an exception. I have to say I'm a huge fan of your work. And every time I see a Blank Noise initiative, I think it would never have occurred to me to do this. And I really wish we could do more, participate more in the initiatives that you initiate. But but we have our constraints of being very few people, mostly bookish people who would not go to a park anyway, maybe. I have no idea. But so vicariously, I pretend that I'm from Blank Noise. These are all our programs, and I'm so proud of everything that you do. So really, thank you for sharing with us. I have a lot of questions, but first let me see if there's anybody from the floor who'd like to ask one. Otherwise, I will come in and ask you. Well, then let me go ahead and ask and start this off. One of the things that strikes me, one of our constraints is actually people. Where do you find the people to participate in these things? I mean, it's in the later initiatives, you've had other organizations partner, like Sangha, Sadbhavna, etc. But in the initial years, in fact, the last slide that you didn't stop at, step-by-step guide, is what we did with Blank Noise in 2008. And I know that when we went through, first of all, finding a place to walk in Chennai was a challenge. Khatija remembers this. We did a lot of discussion of where to do this. Then we landed up in the mall, and yeah, we were in Spencer's, and in Spencer's also, I think it was just, I know I felt that I didn't know how to do this. So how do you prepare and, I don't know, how do you make this happen? Like actually, when you have an idea, how do you bring people in to do it? Same thing with Meet to Speak was like in 2013, 2016, we really wanted to make it part of our campaign. Didn't happen. So I'm really interested in the making it happen part of it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's how do we make it happen? I think in terms of place, when you were bringing up place, sometimes I think that relationship varies and it is intentional. So if, for example, with Meet to Sleep, everybody chooses where they wish to do the Meet to Sleep. And we want to work more and more towards, why is this particular spot relevant to you? So something we want to be even more conscious of moving forward. But every community decides and determines where they want to build Meet to Sleep. Also, in a city like Bangalore, it doesn't have to always be in Kapan Park. It could be spread across parks. So I think the nature of organizing is adaptive, and the different projects lend themselves to different ways of organizing. For example, Meet to Sleep, to be built with feminist allies, has a different kind of ask. Yes, the ask of actually doing it and actually sleeping is a very big ask, but or a very big or an invitation with a very big ask. But something like, but it's still doable because you show up and with an intention and you do it. But something like I Never Ask for It, which relies on building testimonies and is about working with trauma and moving from a place of feeling powerlessness, working and processing memory and moving that to a place of speaking our truth on our own terms, it's a very different ask. So we have to constantly figure that out and adapt to that. But when it comes to working with volunteers who are people who want to do something about it, I think what I'm told is, what I'm told is that they find different ways in which they could choose to contribute. So that's something I'm recognizing in their engagement. But I think with the pandemic, all of this has been tossed around a lot. When there are students, for example, who show up, I think with the pandemic and college timelines and high school timelines, and we're dealing with different capacities of different academic calendars also suddenly. But also age-wise, I think with Patheja, there was a certain time period when we were all in our 20s, from late teens to mid-late 20s. And so there was a sense of everybody as a peer. So it's also a few years later, there's also a wider age spectrum and a different conversation. So it's just like a different beast at different stages, and calls for different kinds of organizing. I mean, there are, so I would say like between 2005 to 2000, maybe 11, 12, when we were doing actions like learning to be idle in public spaces, we had chapters, and there were people who self-emerged and took more responsibility and were visible and said, I want to do this, including Patheja. And so it happened. And there was Annie Zaidi. We were like a community of peers, and we were learning and brainstorming together, critiquing, and we were making it happen. It was very beautiful. If I can look back at it, it was like a peer network of generosity and shared labor. And it's different it's got its own, and I can look back at it as beautiful. Back then I didn't know how to see it. I was just like, we were all discovering something together. But now it's I'm still trying to understand it now. I am 42, somebody who has interned is naturally calling me ma'am, and I'm dealing with that. So and I think the capacities of individuals are affected right now with the pandemic. So I don't have a very clear answer, and because the ask of each campaign is different, the stages of different volunteers are of the life that they're in is different, and how do we relate to each other is different. The issue has grown from being a non-issue to a very prominent issue, and Meet to Sleep, but there are people who sign up. I mean, I'm talking just pre-pandemic. There were people signing up to volunteer, contributing to research, contributing in any way, just showing up because they cared about the issue, transcribing. But I think, that's why we got registered also as a very small organization, to be able to have a team, and to be able to have the capacity to do what we want to do, which is another chapter, but yes.
Yeah. No, actually, I am curious about that. One of the reasons we invite, I'm not sure what the term is, we activists, social entrepreneurs, public artists, into this series is because oral history is a part of what we do. And I think that a lot of the oral history of social work, to put it in a very generic way, is particularly in this age, it's clouded by all of the promotion that all of us have to do. And I think that the journey is important, the stumbling is important. What you just said about not having been able to articulate what you just did at the time when all of you were initially working together. This is exactly how it works. Many of us develop a theory of change ex post facto. I mean, we do what feels right in the moment. We do what is possible in a moment, and then it becomes something else. So for me, actually, your journey from a network of chapters and volunteers to choosing to register, which sometimes feels like a death trap to me, is also interesting in itself. And I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but that's something I would like to know. But also the fact that through all of that, you've retained a certain blank noise initiatives have the lightness of a souffle about them. They're never onerous. They're always creative. That's another thing that I'm actually here. I'm a little envious, not just admiring, because I'm not a light souffle kind of person. But I kind of wish I could be. I think it's wonderful. It makes all of these very meaningful initiatives very attractive and appealing and fun. And to do that while you are also dealing with the anchoring ton weight of organization, I think is something that I can't even imagine. But that's like a half question. And I had another question, but I can't remember it. So I'll let you respond to the half question first. And please just put up your hands, small friendly group. You can pop in and chat, turn on your video. I can keep talking to her, but don't want to monopolize.
And I would love for Khateja to also come in and
yes,
a memory or a response from that. Yeah, maybe what I shared could have been different from what you experienced back then also, which would also be, because for example with being idle, I look at it as learning to be idle, but somebody I spoke to said, yeah, we just love staring down at. So there was a difference in the proposal, the memory that I had and the experience that she had. But just to go back to your question, Swarna, I think I would, yes, it's messy, and I would love to come back to being able to look back at it and respond, because it is something that is ongoing and we're figuring out. But again, the whole premise to be an organization was to have the capacity to build the movement and to meet the vision. So yeah, and to not lose that. So we're figuring out. I think it's a longer conversation, for which I think I would be best equipped if I had hindsight, for which I need a few more years.
Come back in a few years.
I have a couple of responses to the presentation, and actually I had a question that I think is what Swarna had asked last. But the response is, one of the things that really struck me when you spoke about the right to be defenseless is something I've learned recently about myself. Is I've done a lot of very stupid things and very risky things as a young adult. Not because I thought they were risky or stupid, but because it was very hard to recognize what was a risk when you constantly feel afraid, when everything feels like a risk, right? And I think in that sense, I do remember in all our interactions personally and collectively and in action, there was definitely a sense of safety that was very present. Even if I'm only now recognizing that was what the feeling was. It came in with a whole bunch of other things of support and solidarity and community. But I'm trying to think back on what was the safety there, you know. And that was one thing. And the question was, you know, is there a difference that you see? Exactly what Swarna asked, because I remember our interactions being very real and all intimate in some sense, and that there was space for feelings, even though what we were doing was work, which then and even now I somehow see as two distinct parts of myself, you know, that I must be a certain way to produce, which is not the things that were asked very kindly and you know, very respectfully of me in any of the things we did in Blank Noise. And I'm wondering, is that a role shift that you do, you know, in the office when you have to look through all of this and assemble, because there is a certain lowering of guards that happens, and I don't know how easy it is to work from that space to assemble or to, you know, but the other thing is, you know, when you're just thinking also, I remember the blog itself being a very safe place because it was so messy. Not in a bad way, but, you know, I felt like there were so many places I could be in, and there were some actions that were far more intimidating, which I was definitely not ready for, but I would scroll down and they'd be like, okay, you know what, this is something I can do, or I can see myself doing. Um, but yeah, and that it was online also helped, because I think it afforded a certain anonymity, which felt safe in the sense that, okay, I don't have to do anything. I just have to visit this blog and it's something that I can do in the safety of home. But I don't know how from there to the shift of action. The first action I ever did was with Swarna, and then, it somehow felt, at no point did I feel like, oh no, I actually have to do something. It felt very easy, the transition. And I remember it was very confusing, the action itself, because we were distributing the pamphlets, and I remember a cop came and was like, what is this? Or a security guy and like, what are you guys doing? You should have got permission, and it was all very scary. And it was less scary because Swarna was there. So I was just like, okay, she'll take care of it. But that evening when I went back home, because I had extra Xeroxes, because the negotiation with the security was, you do your thing, but you don't distribute this. But I felt so, there's some kind of high I was on. I was giving that thing to people I met on the road, which is something I would never have done before that day. And I think I'm someone who walks a lot in this city, and the walk before this was anonymous, and it still is now, but there's a kind of agency in that anonymity now, and I'm walking not to hide. I'm walking to be left alone with my thoughts, but that's still, there's a kind of assertion in that also, and that I don't need to be a certain kind of public self to be in the public space, if that makes sense. But yeah, just sort of, yeah, that's that.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Sorry.
I don't have a response. I was just I was just affirming what Patheja was saying, and I wanted to understand the question around assembling a bit more. But yeah, and I also wanted to contrast that in some ways with Swarna. Than the vocabulary. It was really nice to hear the souffle aspect of it, and the weight between inside and outside. I think it's got me sparked on that. So I will, like I said, I'd like to process that a little more, but it's making the weight of inside outside, and how to have the inside also. Is it possible to have the inside light as well? So yeah, but Patheja,
I'm thinking of what you're saying about inside and outside. I was talking about organization and being a network, and you're saying inside and outside. That's also interesting to me. So this is a conversation you and I have to continue at some point. But the other question, particularly because you have Kamla in your PPT, every time I've met Kamla, I've been struck by how much of an extrovert she seems. I don't know what she is. I mean, I don't know her well enough to know whether she's an introvert acting like the perfect extrovert but that for me, I've also wondered about the things she does, because I don't think, and this is, given the culture of the movement in India, it's going to be, I don't think I'm less creative, less this, less that, but I can't be out there so much. And for me also, when I'm thinking about blank noise, for me, one of the deterrents, and I think one thing that's hard for me I want other people at Prajnya to do those things. I don't want to leave my desk. I don't actually want to interact with people. I'm just putting it very bluntly. So I wonder about what Patheja says about scrolling through the blog and finding actions that are possible to do resonates with me. But I think, how do we weave in these temperaments? Because introverts are also concerned with public space. We just don't want to go there. We may not want to be with other people too much, but this is like all my questions are half questions, Jasmeen. Because these are conversations I've been wanting to have with you for 13, 14 years. So I'm like flagging all the conversations today.
Some maybe maybe over yeah, I'm trying to think of the ideal setting for introverts to meet in. But I was going to say walk together, but maybe that's not. But yeah, I think that I'm also an introvert, and yeah, so I think it's, again, for me personally, I think in that moment, I'm not an introvert. And including with laughing, or I wouldn't, yeah, with laughing and occupying public spaces through laughter. So it's very deliberate and intentional. And when it feels purposeful, then I leap into it. But in terms of from a place of somebody looking at the messy blog, which I really miss, but is still there, but hasn't been updated, which is now a website. I mean, there's also a website, but yeah, the option that people can choose what they sign up for, whether it's just to, for example, when I never ask for it, it again rests on these listening circles. So it's not that everybody has to come to speak, but you can come in to listen. So again, there are options. And maybe that's, I think I think your comment or the thought it's provoked for me is maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking of, I think there are a lot of introverts at Blank Noise. It's what I'm understanding, what I'm recognizing. Yeah. And yeah, and I do hear this often, that and recurringly more so now, that I find a way to participate that works for me. I find a way to take agency that works for me. So that's something to work with more and be even more conscious of different types of people. But all our actions, even like in being idle, we just said, let's stand there. And I'm thinking, what would Swarna do? Which action would Swarna do? So that's so different. I mean, yeah, something to be more.
I'm good at idle. I might have done that if I'd seen it.
But in that moment, we, the testimonials that emerged from the blogathon, they were translated into different languages. Again, it was people showing up in ways. I remember Anushri saying, "Oh, there's a testimonial here," and Action Shero Anushri, and she said, my mom will translate it to Kannada." So it was people taking conversations home. It's not in one place. It's fluidly going across spaces, and people bringing their families in, neighbors in, and it's like the node to a network, and everyone's contributing in their own kind of way. So it just acquires this shape it did then, of like a living organism where everybody chipped in, and and the premise, I guess the intention has always been around, how do we build ownership of the issue, and how do we find that person who may not identify as activist, who may not even call themselves feminist, but it becomes a place for them to process some of this, and it becomes a place for them to ask questions to themselves, for all of us to ask questions together. So it becomes, for many, I think it's been an entry point also, when they're high schoolers who come in and they're processing these questions together. And Khateja, thank you for saying you felt safe. And it really rests on addressing feelings and asking how we're feeling. And actually, in recent months, I've arrived at 2 words. I'm sorry, they're Hindi words, but it says mehsoos and ehsaas. And mehsoos is to feel, and ehsaas is to realize. So how do we work, how do we create methodologies that allow for transformation based on experience, that allow for solutions based on mehsoos and ehsaas? So it is very much centered around feeling and realizing and locating oneself as an action shero, dero, hero. And what do you do with that location? It has to go beyond, I'm here to volunteer because I want to help. I want to do good. It has to come from that labor where somebody is able to, or is willing to articulate why it's important for them. At their, again, they may not have to reveal all of their life's journey, but why? What is the noticing? A man coming in saying, I want to do this because it's a woman's issue and I want to help. Like, no, what is the observation you make at home every day? Who eats before you and who eats after you? And it rests on a kind of self-confrontation, and that willingness is the first ask of anyone coming in, and that is also a participation. So thank you for your question, because making me think in that way also. Yeah.
Well, we have a reputation for starting and finishing on time. We're almost at the end of our I can't tell you how delighted I am that you spent this morning with us, and we got to start this conversation that will surely have many other opportunities and platforms and occasions, and we will continue it for a bit. I will close. Before I say thank you, I will close with a proposition. We turned 15 this year, and this will be our 12th campaign. And I think it's time to do a blank noise partnership program again. So let's talk about it in the months to come and see what we can make work with our, introversion and our constraints and so on and so forth. Surely we can make it happen. I would love for that to that to kind of come back into the campaign program this year, or even off campaign. But really, thank you so much. I know that you would have rather done this on another day, but you were kind enough to come. And, this for me will be a treasured session of the Prajnya Gender Talks. Thank you so much, Jasmeen.
Well, thank you so much, Swarna, and everybody here. And thank you for your warmth and generosity. I said this in the beginning, and I'm saying this now. And feeling very, it feels like it's the kind of spark of many more conversations to be had, and really indeed that were waiting to be had. So thank you. And
we really invited you with love, and if you're feeling that, then my job is done.
And thank you also for your amazing report on the statistics, which were really a reference for a podcast that we're working on, which needed those statistics. And again, it informs us in ways more than one. So thank you for putting in that labor and making it accessible as well. And I look forward to collaborations and conversations. And also lovely to connect with you again, Patheja. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Patheja will be part of what we do. Thank you. Jasmeen. Thank you everyone for coming. We take a break in May and come back second Saturday in June. Thank you.